Okay, let's go. So, the title of this presentation is Composing Human-Machine Musical Interaction. And if the first word is composing, the goal is to claim that what we do in the team I work in is not to try to create autonomous agents that are able to create music, but maybe more to design agents, instrument whose behaviors can be composed so that you can at the same time be surprised by the result, of course, during the performance, but also master a strong kind of authorship on the results. And this way, we hope that we can offer new musical practices to musicians that are in between composers, performers, or electronic musicians. So before presenting what we do right now, step backwards about what was done at IRCAM at first. So what you see here is a saxophone solo, of course. And this is just a model that represents different links or zones in this audio file that share, let's say, a common musical past or a common musical context. And what we called improvising or generating music at that time was to find different ways to navigate in a non-linear way in this model of an audio file or of a MIDI file or any kind of musical content, so that we do not copy paste the actual memory that we use, but we generate something that is novel while being consistent with the musical logics of the material. So the first step was to have this kind of metaphor of musical memory. And then, of course, the research that we carried out were, okay, but how do we want to control, to guide the way we generate music from a memory model that can be this kind of Markovian model or other kind of models built from a musical corpus? Do we want to address composition? Do we want to address free improvisation without any kind of prior knowledge? Or, of course, and it will be what will be the most interesting for us, a lot of musical situations that are in between something with very strong knowledge about the interaction and something into the wild. So if we look at this musical memory, so this audio file, let's say, it is made of musical slices. So let's say short slices of audio, short slices of MIDI or scores, any kind of musical sequences. And if we have a look at one event in the memory, we try to have a kind of strong genericity of our models, saying that our musical memories are musical contents, that can be any kind of musical content, that we observe, that we describe using a label. And then we hope that we will be able to address different kind of aesthetics and different kind of musical outputs with models working with label and contents, and then instantiate several use cases with several cases of labels and contents. So to formalize it, what we call content, the alphabet that we use to describe our musical content. So for instance, audio, MIDI, reverb, or whatever you want, it describes the musical nature of the memory, what we fit the systems with, and the nature of the generated output. And what we call label, this is what we choose to describe the musical material that we use to train our models. And these labels, so do we want to observe our musical memory regarding acoustic features or high-level features such as chord labels, etc.? These will be the keys that we will have to play with our generative agents or instruments. So to summarize, the main outline of all the things that you will see in this presentation is that we start from what we call a musical memory, that is a model built on a musical sequence of contents labeled by labels. And then we implement generative processes to navigate through this memory and to gather and collect small slices of it to generate a new musical content. And of course, all the work will happen here, because what are the generative processes that we will use and what are the control that we will have over them is where actual composition lies. So the idea with this work that you will see is to be able to offer, as I said, at least to try to offer new practices for composition, for performance, and other kind of authoring of the material that will be generated. And we decided to distinguish two different axes in our research to navigate through what we call the memory model. That can be the one that I represented in the very first slide. And these two axes are planning. So do we want to plan and to define long-term structures that will guide the generation through this memory? Or on the opposite, reactive listening, do we want to be able on stage to react to musical inputs without any kind of prior knowledge of the temporal structure of the performance? And the musical practices that correspond to these two axes are, in a way, the composition of structures when we are in the planning part, and the composition of behaviors when we are in this reactive listening mode. So all the things that you will see, I will show a lot of excerpts from musical productions that we made during this research. And all these things are implemented in library for Max and a device for Ableton Live that is called DICE2. And I will get back to the tools themselves in the last part of the presentation. So just so you know that I will speak about the research process, and the main goal of this research process was at the end to make it implemented in a tool that is distributed. So as I said, our two main axes are planning and listening that will address different types of musical situations. And it will be the outline of this presentation. And the musical excerpts that you will see will be more or less in a chronological order. Because we first started to work on this planning aspect, how to generate something from a temporal specification, going towards more and more reactivity. So I think that the very first example that you will see about this planning strategy are from 2015 or something like that. And the examples with these reactive listening modes in the new agent that we developed, they are from 2023. So the first thing that I wanted to mention before going into this outline is that the process, the development process, is strongly correlated to a musical research process. And the goal of this research project is, of course, to design models, to build tools, but also to make actual music that is broadcasted in a lot of different venues, and not only in context of academic demonstrations. And the idea is to have a practice-based research and performance-led research. That is to say, all the excerpts that you will see, they come from productions that we made with different versions of the prototypes of these works in progress. So basically, the idea was to make concerts with software that were not working, and to make them work while inventing them with a lot of different musicians and composers. But I will get into detail in all these projects through the presentation. And in all this presentation, in all this video that you will see, I'm involved sometimes as a researcher, sometimes I'm as a musician myself. And the idea is to be embedded in productions, to be very close to the musical needs and to the practices that the musician want to explore. So you will see some excerpts from performances from contemporary jazz with Benoît Delbecq, Hervé Célin, Bernard Lubat, contemporary music with Marta Gentilucci, Alexandros Marqueas, Pascal Dussapin, let's say, artistic installations with Pierre-André Serra, Gaëtan Robillard, a huge project that we had and that is still on tour with the French National Jazz Orchestra and Steve Lehman. And we work a lot also with Remy Fox. You will see him in a lot of videos, who is plays saxophone, with a composer and a provider, and that is a long-term partner of this research project. So I will show you a very short zapping of artistic productions that were the context in which we developed these tools. So it will go very fast, just to give you an overview of the different aesthetics that we explored to develop these tools. And then we will go into more details and to explain how these different projects helped us to carry this research and develop these tools.
Earth's atmosphere.
Close inspection of the studies alleged to refute man-made global warming finds that many of these papers do no such thing.
So these aesthetics are quite diverse, and it was precisely the goal, of course, not because we wanted to do something or to build tools that would be able to play in every context and to address every musical genre, but to explore the different types of repertoires and to have a kind of reflexive practice to be able to see what are the things that we can share between these different musical situations, different aesthetics, and what are the entities, the modules, the things that have to be developed for a specific project. And this is how this DICE2 library and plugin were conceived. That is to say, working on a musical project, working on another project, trying to understand what they have in common, what they do not share, and incrementally to have something that is richer and richer with the new collaborations. So let's get back into the past, and we first start with how to navigate through this musical memory model with an approach that is based on planning. So in this presentation, if we address planning, what we implemented is a model that is what we call scenario-based to be able to have anticipatory behavior regarding this structure. So it will be clearer when I will develop these parts. So the idea is that you have your musical memory on one side. So let's say, for instance, that your memory is an audio corpus that is sliced into beats, let's say, and annotated by chord labels. This is one possible example. In this case, the scenario that you will give to the system is a sequence of chord labels. And at the end, you will have a generated sequence that will use slices from the memory, but matching the scenario, and we hope, at least, in the most optimal way, even if the scenario itself is not included in the memory. And of course, when I say optimal, I'm not talking about music, but in terms of the matching between the control that you have and the output of the system. So when we have this fixed structure, we can have several types of musical situation, improvised on a fixed structure, composed at the narrative level, we will see it in the later, and using compositional targets. So what I call scenario in this context, this is a very abstract notion, and it can take the form of chord progression if this is the way we decided to analyze our memory. Or in Baroque improvisation, you have the bass that is written for the left hand that is structured, and then the improviser realizes the harmony improvising with the right hand. Or of course, it can take the form of something that is much more abstract, or drawings or acoustic profiles, just like this profile that were drawn by Garvarez for the poem électronique. So very first attempt with chord progression in 2015. I'm not allowed to show this video by Remy Fox because this is not interesting at all. What I spend all my time saying what we try to do is to offer new musical practices, etc. But in this case, what we try to do is first to be able to match a chord progression. So the aesthetics of this very first attempt, at least to see if we were able to match a sequence, was, okay, let's choose a very simple chord progression. Let's use as memory the live audio that we record from the musician. And our one and only goal is that it is correct. And of course, it is not the track that we followed after, because to be able, as I said, and as I will say again 1,000 times, the goal of this project is not to reach the point where we can generate credible music, but to find new ways for making music. But at least this is what we tried to begin with. Okay. And so very first experiments with this idea of scenario. So in this case, the scenario was a chord progression. And then if we want to try, because this is our goal, to bring a little bit of bizarre or strangeness in the musical process, the first thing that we can try to do at least is to use a memory that is quite heterogeneous. That is to say, not using a saxophone playing funk to play funk with a saxophone, but to use Billie Holiday singing The Man I Love, some French songs by Edith Piaf, and some excerpts from Mozart and Puccini to play The Man I Love. So the idea of this project that was played at l'Aquila Festival in Centre Pompidou in 2015-16 too, I would say, with Hervé Célin and Georges Bloch, was to have musical results that would be kind of patchwork with kind of cut aesthetics, but while having unicity in terms of harmony and having all these memories quite heterogeneous, being quite cut once again, but matching the chord progression that the pianist, Hervé Célin, is playing. So I won't get into detail in the algorithmics and the models, etc. But let's say that for at each step of generation, the model tries both to ensure the continuity with the past of the memory, the past of what was just played. So taking advantage of the memory model that is built on the corpus that we use and that we mentioned at the very beginning, and to ensure at the same time the continuity with the future of the scenario, because since we have a scenario, since we know the structure that we will follow, we can take advantage of it to generate with this kind of anticipatory behavior. So when we have this scenario memory model, we can, of course, improvise on a given chord progression, for instance, or we can also, where am I? Oops, I just lost. Oh, there is someone trying to enter the waiting room. Okay, so we can also use this articulation between scenario and memory to what I called compose at the narrative level. That is to say, to have your model on one side and not to compose music at the score level, but by composing a higher level structure. So this is something that we experimented with Pascal Dussapin, and this is a project I will show just after. And so we have this model that works with musical events. And in the case that we just saw, if we decide to observe, to analyze our musical memory with chord labels, of course, our scenarios will be chord progressions. But we can decide to observe, to analyze our musical memory and to build a model on acoustic features, for example. And in this case, our scenarios can be acoustic profiles or drawings that would represent the evolution of a given audio dimension. And this is what we used for this project, Lullaby Experience with Pascal Dussapin, that was created in 2019 first in Frankfurt and then in the 104 in Paris. And so, as you will see in this very short video, the idea was to have the audience wandering in a huge hall with, at the same time, comedians and musicians from Ensemble Moderne, and surrounded by a huge dome of 84 loudspeakers. And the goal of this project was to generate what Pascal Dussapin called singing clouds in this part of the space, or this part of the space. So just an overview of the project itself here.
My dream was to create such a cloud of lullabies from different origin, different countries, and to draw something musical, of course, but taking these materials to invent such a new atmosphere.
Das ist eine Sammlung von Einschlafliedern, die virtuos miteinander verschränkt, überlappt sind.
Lullabies ist etwas, das ist für uns.
So I just wanted to show you the atmosphere of the setup. And so in this case, the musical memory that we use to generate the electronics were not Puccini, Mozart, or Remy Fox playing saxophone, but thousands of lullabies that we collected through a smartphone app that were sent from all over the world. And the idea was to use these recordings as memories to compose small cells of music, small scores that would happen in this part of the space, this part of the space. So of course, I think you don't have 84 loudspeakers at home, so I cannot show you the actual result of the system, but of the whole musical project, but at least just to give you a hint of how we composed it. So for instance, we could use the system to say, okay, I want to use this subset of lullabies as memory, and to have in this part of the space, on this group of 5 or 6 loudspeakers, something that matches the following description: 5 or 6 voices wandering around the same melody that I give you as a target, using particularly high-pitched voices with this kind of vocal features. So with this association between a scenario and a memory, this is one of the possible output that the system could generate. So once again, what you have to get from this example is not the musical result, but the process. Another kind of articulation between the scenario and memory would be to say, I want to use this subset of lullabies and to have as a scenario the following sequence: first layer of notes around of voices around the first note, then a second layer of notes, then a third layer of voices to get a chord. So this would be one of the possible outputs that would be broadcasted in 4 or 5 loudspeakers for, I don't know, 10 seconds. And in this case, the scenario, the sequence guiding the generation is explicit and it is composed, but we can also use the analysis of another musical material to get this scenario and generate something else. So to give a very basic example, we can have our scenario that is analyzed from a structured track. So for instance, a drum track. So very basic drum track like that, to use as a texture, so as a memory, another musical sequence. To get other results, the texture, so our memory, guided by the structure, so our scenario. And I wanted to emphasize the fact that it is not a transfer of texture, as we can see in a lot of applications of deep neural networks for music composition or for sound synthesis, because the idea is not that you have another sound for each impact of the drum track, but you have a new track with its own temporality, with onsets where at some places where there are no onset in the scenario track, but that is guided with hotspots from this scenario structure. And you can see the same kind of results. This is a part that we extracted from an upcoming album with Remy Fox. And the idea here is to generate a drum track that follows the prosody of spoken voice. So here, the scenario is the acoustic profile that we extracted from an interview by Coleman Hawkins in terms of pitch, register, energy, and spectral centroid. So let's say some audio features that we decided that we wanted to use, and to use as memory to generate something that would match the structure, the drum track. So this is the results.
Well, I don't know. I think eventually that it will go back to both. You know, I think it'll have to be people who write and the artists themselves.
And this is something that was quite a lot used in some artistic installations to generate some soundtracks. For instance, in this project by artist Andrés Herrera, the idea was to create a sound that would be generated by the articulation between some, let's say, lullabies or stories told in an ancient language from Mexico, and some traditional melodies played on traditional instruments. And all the sound design of this movie that was presented at Le Fresnoy and at the Gaîté Lyrique in Paris was to change, to have sometimes melodies as scenarios and songs and stories as memories, and the opposite. So you can see maybe a quick overview of this project here.
Après ma mort, je suis devenue déesse.
Iwan Santoki, Miol Wichiwani y Catlacayot, Iniken Tlatlamantli, Okipia, Senwei, Tlatlamantli Temacalis, Tika Amo Kakanian.
And also we use the system to generate what Andrés called heteroglossia. The idea was to generate a language that does not exist. And we could also wander through our generative model without any constraint, without any scenario. And this way we could generate something that sounds more or less like actual English in this case, but without any kind of meaning.
Through this suggest and anxieties. Through this and normatisticony as multiple accordance portrayal of out the fab's words and erase reference.
So of course, this is just a small excerpt from the whole crowd of voices that he generated. And to finish with this planning approach, this is something that we are experimenting now, working with hip-hop producers, because it's also an interesting way to generate tracks with another angle of view. So saying, okay, this is my memories, this is my structure, and I want to generate a track that is using my memory to generate the structure. So in this example that you will see, once again, the result is not new itself, I don't know how to make new music, but at least we hope that providing this kind of new workflow will give new ideas. So, for instance, you will see two examples of the articulation between the scenario and the memory and the output that come from actual experimentation with hip-hop producers.
Mon petit oiseau a pris ça. Il était un petit homme qui s'appelait Guillaume. Alors mon tout petit.
Or in another aesthetics, and using the same kind of process, I will show you a very short extract of a track of an album that we will release with Remy Fox soon. And in this example, you have at the same time the saxophone playing live and improvising, and this kind of broken loop that you will hear is generated using a very basic hip-hop track as a structure, and improvisation that Remy made with using the keys of the saxophone as a memory. So this is an interesting example because it showed that this is electronic music because it uses all this stuff that I'm discussing. But the goal is to, in this case at least, to make music that sound really organic and to be able to go away from the, let's say, AI aesthetics. So I think that's it for the planning approach and navigating through the memory using scenario. And so let's go a little bit further into introducing reactivity in the process. So in what we saw, this scenario was fixed. And the first step could be at least to make this scenario dynamic. And this way, it can be seen as short-term queries that we can send on the fly to the system, trying to make them consistent with what was played, the new query that we send, to make it a kind of declarative instrument. So the idea is to make some dynamic calls to this thing that we saw previously that is intrinsically offline or compositional. And the kind of musical situation that it addresses is something that we can call meta DJing, or playing at the level of intentions, because let's say that when you use a sampler, you're pushing a button to say, right now, I want you to play this musical sequence. And in this case, when you're pushing a button, you're saying, I want you to start a generative process that will generate something matching this specification that I'm giving right now. So, as I said, the idea is to be able to ask the model, right now, I want you to generate something that matches the following short-term specification. For instance, this chord progression, D minor 7, D minor 7, etc., ensuring the fact that you will find the smoothest way to make it consistent with what we played previously. So the first experiment we made with this were with Marta Gentilucci, who wanted to improvise with a virtual soprano that she would control with this instrument. And her interest was in the vocal gestures. She wanted to control this soprano herself, playing with the computer, and she was not interested in defining the sequence of pitches of other characteristics, but these vocal gestures, that is to say, tenuto, staccato, etc. So the idea was to build a setup so that she could control in real time with a kind of live coding approach. Right now, I want you to generate something that would match the following specification. That would be a sequence starting with tenuto, then agilita, then staccato, etc., and doing this in real time. So this would be the output of this query. And just a very short example of one work session that Marta Gentilucci did with the soprano Anne Hurley. So there is a problem in this video because we only see Anne Hurley singing, but of course, as I was trying to explain, the idea was to build an instrument. So this is an actual duo between Anne Hurley singing and Marta Gentilucci controlling the system. And once again, what is important here is not the musical aesthetics or the musical results, but this process of defining short-term dynamic scenarios that will be the thing that we will use then to introduce even more activity. So as I said, no, I won't explain this. As I said, the idea is to provide this kind of playing at the intention level, saying right now generate this or this. And this is what I call the software instrument for meta DJing in a way. If you are a musician using the system and playing with it, and if the queries are sent manually, but these queries can, of course, and it will be the last part of this presentation, they can come from the intelligent listening to live inputs so that these queries are not explicitly made by the computer musician using the system, but they can come from the behavior that we compose for the agents to translate a perception into musical intention, using a lot of quotes when I say intention and perception. So everything will be in this, what happens between the microphone and the generative process. And to make the transition toward this last part, I will show you this example so musically, it makes no sense to show this because it was improvisation of something like 20 minutes. And I will show you a transition between two, let's say, movements of the improvisation. In the first phase, Steve Lehman is playing saxophone, and this is purely improvised, and I'm playing with the system, asking for short-term scenarios in terms of chord progressions, density, etc., etc. And then we switch to another musical phase where the system is not listening to my control, but listening to the saxophone that is played by Steve Lehman. And then the system becomes it's not generating accompaniment anymore, but it's generating a spectral augmentation of the saxophone. And this is what we are really interested in, is to be able to be at the frontier between idiomatic and non-idiomatic music with the same tools, to be able to be in this frontier that, okay, maybe we are playing square jazz accompaniment at first, and just changing some slight parameters, we go more into spectral music and then go back into playing jazz, for instance. So this is a transition between two different roles taken by the same model. So this transition makes a transition to the last part of this journey from planning to reactivity. And of course, what is important here is how we want to define, to compose the behaviors as I said, to transform the perception from the environment into musical intentions, once again, between quotes, for our generative agents. So this is the main focus of this reactive listening playing mode, let's say. So here in this case, we want to combine this planning thing with reactivity. And the musical practice that we try to offer with this is, before the performance, to be able to compose behaviors, to formalize the way we want the system to react, and to let the musical form itself to be built during the performance by the interaction. So this is an example, two examples actually, from an improvisation with Remy Fox. In the first part, you will see that the behavior that is given to the agent that we activated in this improvisation was to use some industrial noises and to listen to the playing modes of the saxophone and some spectral aspects. And in the second part, the behavior that was composed for the agent was to use prepared piano and voices and to unfold melodical and harmonic material starting from very sparse inputs from the saxophone played by Remy. And to be a little bit more precise, what I called composing a behavior, so it can be with the Max version or the Ableton Live version or in general, is basically to decide what is the memory. So in the next example, the memory is recording of a balafon, what we want to listen to. So in the next example, chroma, which is an audio feature that says something about the melody in local harmony, let's say. How we want to listen to the live input. Do we want to listen in a continuous way or listening to each event? And how do we want to set the interaction between what we perceive and what is generated? Do we want to match strongly or to match sometimes and digress? So in the example of I think in the next example, yes, this is this setting. So the idea is to have a kind of floating musical coordination in terms of harmony between what is generated and what is played by the musician, with some meeting points in terms of harmony. Or another example from this same concert with French National Jazz Orchestra and Steve Lehman. So in the next example, you have two different phases, let's say. So Fanny Medegos is playing the flute, and in the first part, the agent that we used to play with her used orchestral masses as memories, and we were listening to let's say the register, some spectral features, and the pitch. The idea was to listen in a continuous mode and to meet sometimes with what she was playing, but so we wanted the agent to live its own life the rest of the time. So you will see that at some point she is fed up with the agent wandering, and she's insisting on a note, on a pitch, so that she is sure that the agent will catch her and play with her. And then she's playing with an agent that was fed with drums, listening to, let's say, the density of what she plays. And what is interesting in this second example is that I discussed quite a lot the compositional point of view of how to compose the interaction, etc. But what is interesting in this example too is that as you will see or hear, the idea here was to blur a bit the correlation between the inputs and the outputs. So it's not a direct interaction that we can apprehend, but rehearsing with the system, the musician Fanny Menegos was able to find a way to play this instrument. And she is improvising this interlude. And you will see that with this drums part, she is able informally to drive it the way she wants it to be. And when she is okay with her improvisation, she knows how to control these drums with her flute, to make it slow down, to make it loop, and then she turns back to the drum and the double bass, saying, okay, I'm getting to the point where I wanted to go, and you can get in now. And this is also this aspect that we're quite interested in our research, even if I did not mention it that much in this presentation, is the way you can informally learn this instrumentality of playing an instrument with another instrument, and to play something that is not directly what comes out of your acoustic instrument, but that is guided by it. Maybe, yeah, last example that is interesting because in this case, so this project, Music of Choices, with Alexandros Marquez, the idea was to have no one else than the pianist on stage. And in this case, the library was not used to build a device that would be an instrument that I or someone else is playing with, but really to have a kind of setup that is autonomous with behavior does not change during the performance. And Alexandros playing the piano had a controller with something like 10 agents, 10 presets that he could just activate or switch between both. So this is another use that is less instrument oriented, but more, let's say, yeah, setup or installation, right, sometimes. And so here the system is listening to the piano and is not generating audio, but is generating MIDI to control the disc clavier on the left. So here in this case, the goal was not to get the very same clear interaction that we could have with, remember, Remy Fox playing a note and some voices and prepared piano unfolding something around the same note. But the idea was to have Alexandros and I preparing, composing these behaviors, and to have him, he trained a lot playing with this. And the idea was just for him to get that point where he was at the same time composer of the theoretical behavior of the agents, but it was not purely deterministic, of course, because the idea is to have something that is reacting to what he plays, and the setups and the behavior of the different agents that he used were designed so that it was at the same time something rich and not that, let's say, transparent, but something that he was really able to control with his own playing. So as I said, all these examples and all these productions were the research ground that we used to develop at the end the AICA library, that is both library for Macs that is available also as a plugin for Ableton Live. So of course you saw a lot of examples that are based on generating audio from audio, listening to an audio input to generate audio, etc. But this is one of the use cases. We have a lot of other things, generate text or symbolic data from other kind of data. I'm just saying this before showing yet another and last video with generating audio from audio. This is the work that we did with Remy Fox. This is kind of didactic video. The goal is here just to have a kind of overview of the different aesthetics that we want, not aesthetics, but let's say playing mode that we want to be able to address with the same kind of setups. So as you will see, with the same articulation between memory, scenario, and listening to the environment, we can reach, depending on the parameters that we set for the system, we can reach something that is a kind of musical discourse, a duet, accompaniment or something, or on the opposite, something that is clearly an audio effect, very basic audio effect. And what is interesting, of course, is to find ways to be in between and to navigate from one to the other. So just a short overview of what we think can be the different types of playing mode that you can get with the audio use case of this system. Here. This part with the saxophone controlling the voice in the very first example. So this audio use case that is implemented in the Ableton Live device allows you to first choose your memory. For instance, I want to use this voice analyzed using these or these musical dimensions. Then I want it to be driven using audio input coming from the environment listened to in this particular way with different setups to make it more or less matching the input. So as I said, this is available as an Ableton Live plugin that we made with Manuel Poletti and Augustin Muller, and this plugin was made itself from the Max library that is much more open because it is only it only offers an agent and a server, and this is basically learning things and generating things being symbolic sequences. So you learn some content labeled by labels to have a kind of control of any kind of rendering. In 90% of what you saw in these examples, we learned a rendered audio, but of course, we provide other tools and abstractions and objects for rendering to generate other kind of data. So as I said, text or MIDI or thing like that. And if your scenario are sent manually or from list set offline, you can build compositional setups. And if you use some other tools that are provided to derive some queries from the real-time listening, you are going much more toward this reactive listening aesthetics that you saw in the last videos. So we have a lot of tutorials that address the basics, how to work with agents, how to chain them, of course, focus on audio. So all these tutorials are pretty well documented. The main audio use case that you saw in the main part of the presentation is built using Mubu and Katart from the ASMM team at IRCAM. And the library is accompanied by a lot of tutorials that come from the actual productions that we did with the artists that were really kind enough to let us use the material that we actually used for the production. So from Marta Gentilucci, Alexandros Marqueas, Steve Lehman, Frédéric Morin, and Rémi Fox. I invite you to visit the this thread on the IRCAM website, forum website, where we start to gather a lot of projects made by different DICE2 users building their own setups. So I don't have enough time to show it right now, but some of them use DICE2 to generate strange things in VR. Others use it to work with digital musical instruments that they build and developing the software solution matching their hardware setting. I can mention this project also by Hans Tuchtu and Vijay Iyer that was played at Harvard University, I would say, 10 days ago. So you will find all these contributions online. So thank you to all these early adopters that were courageous enough to build their own settings using DICE2. And we have a lot of IRCAM productions that will be played in the coming months using DICE2, in particular by Augustin Muller, who is one of the co-author of this environments. And also this project, Ex Machina with French National Jazz Orchestra, is still on the road and will, so we released the album in last September. And we'll have some concerts in London, in Paris, and in Berlin in June. And I think that I will stop here. No, before stopping, I will just mention the fact that you have a lot of video tutorials.
What the behavior is
by
a
Mathieu
set
Ostrovsky
of simple commands
with
sent to all the various objects.
An English accent that is way better than mine. So something like 80 minutes of video tutorials about DICE2. So this series of tutorials is available on the YouTube channel of IRCAM. We just know that we will have a next training course in the week of the February 15, 2025, and a lot of forum discussions and resources online if you're interested to go further in the exploration of these environments. So thank you for your attention, and I would be happy to answer your question if you have some, but I know that you have some.